I want to begin with a statement regarding the memo that's received such attention today. Administrator Pruitt, in his memo on the NACs, requested that the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee compile data on background ozone. As we've just heard in the testimony, that request is in line with Clean Air Act and its interpretation by the courts, including such cases as American Trucking Association versus EPA. The administrator of EPA is permitted by law to consider background ozone in NACs implementation. And with that, Mr. Franquist, Yuma County, bordered by Mexico, bordered by California, rural county, very few big businesses, very few even medium-sized businesses in it. Is it possible for Yuma County to reach attainment even under diligent efforts to offset emissions?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's unlikely given the sources. When we look at the National Emissions Inventory for volatile organic compounds and NOx, the two precursors for ozone, we're looking at something in the neighborhood of 2% for VOCs and 5% from vehicles from essentially anthropogenic sources in the Yuma area. So you likely could remove all industrial activities in the Yuma area, but because of the influence of international sources, you would likely still have a challenge of attaining the standard.
So we hear about the impacts of ozone on health. We just talked about you could actually eliminate all industrial outputs and still fail to meet the NACs requirement levels. So that would further induce poverty into that area. And so what's the health impacts of poverty? What are the studies said about that?
Mr. Chairman, we've referenced a couple today, and we've supplied several in the past, but again, the connection for poverty and ill health is enormous. We know in areas like Yuma, when we're 19% unemployment, what that does is adds a burden to healthy foods, access to health care, so it goes hand in hand. And so, again, there's numerous academic articles linking public health issues and the economy, and so again, that's why we don't challenge that ozone in and of itself is a problem. However, when that ozone's coming from somewhere else and the Clean Air Act is designed to impact negatively those local economies, now those impoverished areas have a 1-2 punch. And so again, we think it's really valid to begin to look at how the Clean Air Act is designed to protect public health and the environment, but to also relieve some of those areas of some of the significant economic impacts that go with the 179B demonstration.
And Mr. Stella, in your testimony, you discussed a diminishing rate of return on U.S. control programs impacting air quality as the incremental cost of every ton of emissions increases. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. In essence, what we're seeing is that as a series of controls have already been historically put in place, and we see domestic ozone reduced from the anthropogenic sources that we have control over, and an ever-increasing relative contribution of uncontrollable sources, whether or not be international transport or background or stratospheric intrusions and the like. As we try to get each additional ton reduced to improve our air quality, the cost becomes higher and higher. And it's simply because we're not getting the same response out of a reduction of 1 ton of NOx or VOC, for example, to reduce an equal amount of ozone concentration. And so as we get lower and lower and we see a greater percentage of uncontrollable sources dominate what our ambient conditions are, it's going to cost more to reduce less.
Thank you. I would like to elaborate on that just for a second. As we see the diminishing return economically, do you see it, is there a diminishing return as far as health conditions and improvement in health as you move from, say, 70 NACs down to 69, for instance?
I'm not sure that that's a question for me, not being my area of expertise. But as a scientist, I would believe that as you see the ozone levels decreasing, you see improvements in health.
Is there a statistical, well, you just said it's not your area, so I'm just wondering if there's a statistical diminution. But regardless, we have reached basically the end of our time today. I appreciate all of you for coming and sharing your your testimony. I think it's important for us, as this is allows for a robust discussion, and we need a robust discussion on these issues. And there's a lot of considerations, a lot of variables that we have to take into account. I appreciate those on both sides of the aisle for being here and participating today. And with that, we adjourn.